Hello, welcome to the official Spotlight Procurement podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb, and thank you very much for listening. Today, I'm delighted to say that my guest is Sarah Walters. Sarah is the head of procurement at the insurance company AXA, a role which she has returned to in July 2025. So that's really interesting. I'm sure we'll pick up on that. Sarah's previously held roles at Clark, many other procurement roles, but actually also spent some time founding her own business and operating as a consultant, which again, I'm sure will be interesting to explore in a bit more detail. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining me for the podcast today. As we said, you've got a really interesting career in our profession. So it kind of, perhaps as a starting point, it'd be great if you could just put a little bit more context to your experience up to this point, really.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. So sadly, I've been in procurement a very long time. So in the interest of time, I'll try and give you the potted version. I fell into procurement out of university. I did a graduate trainee scheme with Jacobs Bakery, which was part of the Danone Group at the time. And you had to apply through a given route. And I looked at the information that I'd been sent and thought, what's this purchasing and logistics all about then? And it just seemed to best fit my skill set. So I applied, got the role, and then started to learn all about what purchasing and logistics were. So that was my start. So that was in manufacturing. I was buying cardboard boxes. A lovely place to start. So moved into absolutely. Moved into other areas of packaging and spent a few years with them. Ended up doing a development buying role, and it was quite an interesting start to my career. Moved from there to Dyson long before they were what they are today. So that was when they were still manufacturing in the UK, and they only had two models. So they had one upright and one cylinder vacuum cleaner. So that was a long time ago. But that was really interesting because it taught me, it was a very fast moving company at the time. They were growing massively. So I got the opportunity to get involved in lots of interesting things. So that was great. And then moved into a much more traditional industry, so food production. And again, we were doing a lot of, the company was called Unique, which you might not have heard of. They were originally Unigate, which was an old dairy company. But the opportunity there, which was really interesting, was we were working with a lot of private label supermarkets, so Marks and Spencer's, Sainsbury's, Tesco. So, margins were extremely tight. So that was really where you kind of understand about cost management, and really procurement had a massive role to play in the success of the business, really, in terms of its profitability. So that was a really fast-paced part of my career. A lot of traveling around the country because they did everything from smoked salmon in Scotland all the way down to dessert production in Devon. So there was a lot going on in that organisation. And then it was from there that I moved into financial services. So that was my first foray into AXA, which was quite a few years ago. Let's just say it was double digits.
We'll keep it vague, Sarah.
Keep it vague. Yeah, keep it vague. So that was interesting because I'd done some indirects in the manufacturing space, but that was the first time I was really in a pure indirect space. So obviously they don't really manufacture anything. It's a product set. So I spent a lot of time there, had my family, and really interesting. Got to do lots of different things with AXA, finishing up, heading up their supplier relationship management function in their wealth business, which is no longer part of the organisation, but made redundant from there, had a young family, went contracting so I could work part-time.
Yeah.
And then from there is where I set up my own business with a couple of colleagues of mine, Asta Commercial Services, which is still going. But a relatively small consultancy, but we were doing fractional procurement long before people were calling it fractional. So basically providing services to organisations that either didn't have the capacity or the scope to have a whole procurement team, or they just needed some extra bandwidth in certain specific areas. We were all very IT driven at the time. So if they needed kind of IT transformation programs supported, things like that. So that was really interesting. Did that for about 5 years and really enjoyed it actually, because there's a lot of, client interaction, bringing expertise, bringing order where there wasn't any. We worked with quite a lot of small and medium-sized digital first organizations who were growing quickly and needed some procurement support to get their back office systems organized. So that was really, really interesting. And then decided a couple of years ago it was time to get back into full-time permanent employment. And actually my kids had got a lot older very quickly. It all happens very fast. And
it does.
Me at home a lot less. So I went back into financial services, first of all with Aldermore, did a couple of years with them, mainly looking after their motor finance business out of Cardiff. And then this opportunity came up last year with AXA, and it was too good not to throw my hat in the ring. And here I am after my first 6 months in role.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So Sarah, that's a kind of varied career, right? You've done your financial services, as you say, lots of different sectors. You've also spent some time kind of consulting. I'm intrigued, given all of that experience, like what has that taught you about our profession generally, right? And perhaps the things that we as a profession need to get better at. Like what are your key learnings from all that time?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think I look back on my career and I'd like to think that I've been successful, right? Which is what's
Yep.
brought me to this point. So all I can talk to, I guess, are the things that I think that have made me successful in what I do. And I think what makes a good procurement person is, first of all, it's about being curious and listening, right? So I think a lot of people, we need to bring expertise to the table, absolutely. But
Yep.
you've got to understand what the stakeholders want, because we are a service function, right? We're here to support the business to drive value. And so I think for me, it's always been about stakeholder engagement. And to get good stakeholder engagement, first of all, for me, it's about getting curious about what they need, what they want, and they don't always know, or they articulate it in a way that means something to them. But you have to ask them questions to get to the answer that you need to inform what you need to tell them or how you need to help them. So, and I think that's probably why, I enjoyed working my own consultancy, so much, because
Yep.
actually that's what you're doing a lot, right? You're going to clients and saying to them, what are your problems? And then this is how I can solve them. This is how I can help you solve them.
Yep.
So I think that's a really good start point, is just thinking into, if we're a service function and we're here to help you, let's
Yep.
ask the right questions and let's get curious about what it is that the problems that are keeping you up at night from a supplier management or a risk management perspective. And then it helps, tailor your response to those different stakeholders, right? And then you're going to be successful because you're actually bringing to them the skills and the knowledge and the expertise that they need, as opposed to what you think they need.
Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you're in those different organizations that you've worked in, where procurement has been most effective or most valuable to the business, why was that? I mean, what were the structures, what were the behaviors, what were the kind of skills that made it so important? And so, because we're the profession, we spend a lot of time talking about and kind of seat at the table and like, our brand positioning and all that, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but I'm intrigued from your real world experience.
So what I would say is, first and foremost, it's about being part of the business, right?
Okay.
So if I look at AXA, for example, we have a business partner model alongside our category team. And I think that's really key. So the business partner, their role is to absolutely face into the business. It's really important that they understand what the business requirements are at a strategic level, and they work with all of the stakeholders across the business to become part of their team, right? So they sit on the leadership teams where possible, and then we get first-hand knowledge and understanding of what's going on. And then we can bring that back into the procurement team, to the category teams who are supplier facing, and have the knowledge of what's going on in the market, what suppliers are doing, what the changes are that are coming through, what the opportunities are. And then you bring the two things together, and that gives you the opportunity to then to make all that fit together and actually build something which is useful for the business. And actually you are ahead of the game, right? So you're working together. So I think it's about becoming part of the business in that sense. And that's how we do it at AXA, right? It's through that business partner model and with the category team. So we've got the two aspects of it. And if I look at the role I did at Aldermore, was the same thing. So I was facing into the motor business, and I pretty much did all of the activity that was required for the motor business. So, and they had their own specific requirements. So obviously, they worked as part of the wider organization, but they had their own specific suppliers that did specific things for them. And it's about understanding that. So you're not just reacting to requests to support the business. You're actually working with them from a strategic perspective that says, what's your direction of travel? What are the things that are going to be your key drivers going forward?
Yep.
What are the challenges that you're facing into? And then how can we help you solve those or improve your ability to deliver on those strategic objectives? So it's about, I think you can't be a hands-off part of the organization who just responds to requests for support. You have to be strategically invested and aligned to the organization to help them deliver in the best possible way.
Yeah. And Sarah, again, when we had the prep call for the podcast, you made some really interesting points to me around value chain, particularly kind of end to end, and your experience of that on the ground. It'd be great, again, if we could talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's about predicting ahead, right, as much as you possibly can. So I think it comes back to the last point I raised, which is, if you are going to drive the most value as a procurement function, the earlier that you can be involved in the discussions, the better. So when I think back to the one of the best jobs I ever had, notwithstanding what I'm doing today, of course, but
Obviously,
I worked on the development of the washing machine for Dyson. Now, it was a bit of a flop as a product goes, right? So let's put that to one side. But actually, in terms of a model for ways of working, it was excellent. So we were co-located. We were a dedicated procurement team of 2 or 3 people. We were co-located with the design engineers, and we sat with them on a regular basis. And they literally, when I started, had a design on a piece of paper, and we had a bill of materials, and we had a target cost. And we worked together on a daily basis to design cost out of the process. So what that meant was that we were engaging the suppliers early. The team, the design engineers were talking about what they were trying to achieve, what they wanted the look and feel of the machine to look like, because it was quite different to what had been out in the market in the first place. I don't know if you remember it, but it was big, it was colourful, it was plastic, it wasn't quite like a white good, washing machine is with all the other manufacturers, right? So we were trying to do something different. So we engaged the suppliers up front, and we talked to them about, this is what we're looking at, this is what it looks like. They would give us some costings, and then we'd work together to actually value engineer that down to get to the level that we needed. So that was a real example where procurement were involved right at the front of the design process before any tooling had been invested in, before any investment had been made around big capital investment, so that we could actually make sure that we had the numbers right before we said go. Whereas, often what happens is the business have done a lot of their thinking, and then they come to procurement and say, right, now can you help us get the right deal from the supplier? Or even they've spoken to the supplier already and they say, well, can you help us get the cost down? And it's like, well, all of the decisions have been made at that point, and it's very difficult to go back and value engineer that, or it's a lot more work, put it that way. It takes a lot more time. So I'm a massive advocate of early engagement, forward thinking, forward planning, because that definitely gives procurement their best opportunity to help the business drive cost out before you even, in the thinking stage, basically.
Yeah. And so when you look at a value chain, as we said, end to end, so that I completely understand that point about at the start of that and procurement being engaged and the subsequent benefit that comes. But what's your experience as that value chain progresses, like towards, particularly the back end of that value chain, right? Because I guess often that's neglected. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, Simon. And when I was working with all our clients, when I had my own business, we would advocate that a lot, right? So, I mean, lots of people will talk about the end-to-end supplier life cycle. There could be 8 stages, 10 stages, whatever. Everybody splits it slightly differently, but there is definitely a front end piece, which is around negotiation and contract implementation. And then there's the whole of the life cycle management, right? And we used to talk to our clients a lot about, you can do a lot of good work at the front end to negotiate an excellent deal, but if you don't manage it through the life cycle, you get leakage everywhere. And I think, not for every supplier, of course, you have to segment your supplier base and you have to make sure that it's proportional. But for those large vendors where you've spent a lot of time and effort negotiating good deals, you absolutely need to make sure that you manage it in life to get that value delivered and hold them to account, right? Because if you're not focused on it, then they lose focus. And, it comes back to what we were saying before. If, we want to be engaged with the business units in terms of their strategic direction, so do the suppliers. And again, we don't need to involve all suppliers in those conversations, but there are definitely some vendors where it's good value to make sure that they're involved in that strategic thinking, because they can bring lots of ideas and value and information and thoughts into how do you best deliver those. And I think some organizations are still wary of bringing suppliers in. But I think if you've got the right relationships in place and you've done the work up front to select the right vendors, they should be your partners, and you should absolutely be working with them to drive value, because that's what they're there for, right? You've decided to outsource services or products or whatever to the experts because it's more efficient than it is running it in-house. So absolutely drive the value out of those relationships, right? Which is not just about delivering to the contract. It's about what's the additional things that they can help you with. Because particularly, at AXA, we've got quite a few very long-term relationships with key strategic vendors. And that's the way that we work with them. We've got a supplier relationship management function in place, and they make sure that they manage those relationships through their life. And we work very closely with those teams. So it's really important.
Sarah, why do you think so many organizations that value leakage thing, I think is, not quite universal, but it's very, very common. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of people see the value in negotiating the contract up front.
Yep.
But I think a lot of organizations leave it to the business to manage the suppliers going forward. So I think people think that, if I'm the person who has the requirement and I'm sitting in the business, I understand that requirement, then I absolutely can manage that supplier to deliver against that. Some people can, but it is a skill set in its own right? It is if you look at sales organizations, they have teams of people who do the upfront selling, and then they have teams of people who are account executives who help you deliver in life, right? We should absolutely mirror that in terms of the way that we act from a procurement perspective, because negotiating contracts up front is a different skill set, in my opinion, to managing suppliers in life, right? And if you're asking people to do it side of desk as part of their day job, then they don't always have the focus or the skill set to do that. So, and again, it's not for everything, right? But I think for your large vendors, you absolutely need people with the right skill set who can drive that value and who are focused on it, right? If they're trying to do it as part of their day job, it might never get the focus, or it might get peaks of focus and then it becomes less of a key activity. But I think it should be validated as a role and an important role that brings a lot of value. And I think the ROI is obvious, right? I think you can absolutely make a business case for somebody to be managing the relationship in life, because the value's there, right? And the loss of opportunity is huge if you don't do it properly. So,
you will have spent a lot of time talking to suppliers, negotiating with suppliers, like interacting with suppliers. I'd love to get your observations on, again, what our profession needs to do to be effective at that. And I guess maybe more focused on the EQ side than the analytics I think we could take. But I'd love to get your view on that.
So it's a really good question. And I think the answer is almost the same as the one I started with, right?
Okay.
So what you asked me about what you need to be good at procurement. And I talked a lot about stakeholders and being curious and listening. And I think it's absolutely the same with suppliers to start with, right? I mean, there's lots of skills you need to drive value out of a negotiation, and it depends on the relationship, right? So not every relationship is a good relationship. Not every relationship is an easy relationship. AXA is in a lucky position in that they're a large organization and they're an interesting customer, right? In my world, in my ASTA world, when I was a consultant, you're dealing with smaller clients, who potentially aren't as interesting to large vendors. So you're trying to negotiate with Microsoft or Salesforce, and you haven't got a high level of spend, So I think you have to get creative, and you have to be open and honest and listen. And it's about the conversation and it's about the communication. So I always think it's better not to go in with a predetermined idea about what you're going to get, because sometimes if you ask lots of questions, it's surprising how much different information you'll get back than what you perhaps anticipated. So you could walk into those negotiations thinking, well, I'm a small person with not much spend. They're not going to be very interested. But actually, these vendors deal with small businesses all the time. And sometimes they have different ways of dealing with small organizations that mean that you can be important to them. And actually, there are still benefits that you can gather. So I think it's going in with an open mind and being interested and asking lots of questions, because it's amazing how many times over the years I've done that and you've got a different answer than the one that you thought you were going to get. I've also spent quite a bit of time prepping businesses around if you're going to go into these conversations and I ask a question that you think is a stupid question, please don't chip in. I'm asking it for a reason. And I want the supplier to answer the question, not you. So again, I think we have to assume that we don't have all the answers, and that actually the more that you ask questions, the more information you're likely to get. So it doesn't mean you always get the outcome you want, but at least, I think you want to come away thinking, well, I couldn't have asked anything else. And actually I tried every avenue, and therefore, I've got the best position that I can possibly get. So that's my take anyway.
Sarah probably needs to be my last question in terms of time. But the other thing, when we had the prep call, you talked very passionately about was, I guess, our profession, the future of our profession, kind of our brand position, how we attract particularly younger people. I've got some children at home starting to think about what they want to do as a career, and procurement's nowhere near their radar and their thinking, probably because they don't have the slightest interest in what their dad does. But what's your view on all that? That would be great to get.
Yeah, I think I mentioned at the top of the conversation that I sort of fell into purchasing and logistics, as it was called then. And, sadly, that was 30 odd years ago. And I would have hoped things would have progressed a bit more by now, if I'm really honest, in terms of, you're right. Everyone always thinks about, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be an internet person. I want to be whatever it is, I want to be in marketing. I want to be in sales. These are still the things that people go to in terms of understanding. And to your point, I'm not sure my kids still really get what I do either, or really care. But but I do feel passionate about procurement as a career. I've stayed in it, for the last 30 years for good reason, because I think it's an exciting place to be. I think there's lots of opportunity, and I think we've still got some work to do to get people to understand the value that we add. I read a lot of stuff on LinkedIn about procurement these days, and we're still not incentivized in the same way that salespeople are for bringing in new sales. We as a function, as a discipline, bring lots of value, financial value to businesses, but it still seems to be something that's sort of slightly taken for granted. So yeah, I do feel passionate about procurement as a career because it's been my life, right? And I'm not going anywhere else. I will finish my life in procurement. So I think there's definitely some more I could do probably around getting involved in talking to schools and colleges about procurement as a career. And we were talking off air before about, I saw somebody had posted on LinkedIn last week about SIPs have now joined up with the government to actually talk about how they get into schools and start making procurement more visible as a career option as opposed to a job. And so, just after we were talking about this, I was thinking, how can I get involved? Because as somebody who's been in the industry for a long time, it feels like it's kind of on my shoulders to step up and help in that way, right? Because I do like to evangelize a bit about procurement, right? Not just in the organization I'm working in, but I guess that's probably why I enjoyed being a consultant as well, because you get to talk to lots of different people about how procurement can help. And I think that's the point, is that it's about trying to help people understand that procurement have got an interesting role to play in the success of a business. And it is a strategic function. It shouldn't just be a tactical function. It should be a strategic procurement function that's here to bring value and drive the strategy of the business. I've been pondering on what more I can do in this space, in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And I really hope that whatever it is that SIPs have got planned with the government goes somewhere and actually becomes something meaningful, because there are a lot of capable people out there, and we need them in the procurement space. So
yeah, absolutely. Sarah, thank you so much for talking to me today. That was really interesting. Great to get your perspectives, and thank you for taking the time to chat to us. It's appreciated.
Not at all, Simon. It's been my pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give us a click on the follow button on your chosen podcast platform. We'd also love to hear your views on either future topics, or indeed if you've got any thoughts on future guests that we should look to get onto the podcast. Thanks again. See you next time.